prepare for that. Let me begin by, I think, why do you think the public discourse tends to lag 10 steps behind the government policies? Either we are amplifying government positions or we are attacking it for political reasons. The conformism, is that something built into our strategic culture? Is that something we can actually change?
I am not sure it's conformism because, if it was conformism and changes started happening, then the conformist side would also reflect that in the public discourse. I think there is a kind of a time lag. I think there is a hysteresis, if you would, that there is very rapid change, but many parts of our society cannot or do not wish to keep up with those changes. So some of it becomes political. But I think in many cases it's also not political, but it is a comfort of a certain habit. And possibly in some sections, a certain validation. Look, if I went through 20, 30 years of something, and now you suddenly come and tell me, you know what, the world has changed and everything that you believed and advocated maybe doesn't work anymore. I'm not likely to take to it very kindly. So there's a natural human resistance. So change is very hard to actually, it's very easily said. Look even on the economic side. Where there are material benefits riding on the compulsions of change. But yet I would say the intellectual resistance to it sometimes can be very, very strong. Now in foreign policy, because it tends to be more, in a way, at least the argumentation is very ephemeral. It's not like people contest you with numbers or say, that relationship doesn't matter. It often comes down to very, abstract concepts like, are you doing this? Are you compromising your sovereignty? You're doing this, but you are leaning too much towards one country. This is not our tradition because Nehru wouldn't have done it. Now, those are habits picking up, today.
Talking of Nehru, I think 75 years after independence, are we really ready to historicize the relationship rather than viewing it from current politics, that actually there is a history, we can't undo it, that's a reality. Therefore, at least in your books, you tried to question some of the past assumptions. Is that debate, you see, growing? And I think we need to look back without recrimination, without, allegations that this is what happened, this is the circumstance, the conditions for which it arose, and how do we advance beyond that?
In a way, yes, Raj, but I would put it this way. I think different worlds will have to do it their particular way. Now, clearly in the political world, it will have a polemical side, But I don't think that the foreign policy intellectual world should really get overly influenced by the political side. Leave politicians to do what politicians do. But the media world or the academic world should do what journalists or academics are supposed to do. And I think they ideally should be able to look at it much more objectively. Because unlike, the political world by very definition is a partisan world, which is not the case. So I would argue that in many ways, the ability to objectively assess our past has to come from the track 2 world, from the think tank world, from the university world, from the media world, from the cultural world, that they can actually look back. It's not anybody's contention that everything in the past was wrong. And therefore, it should not be anybody's contention that everything was right and therefore immutable. I think there is a reality out there. We need to have a balanced view of that reality. There has to be, as you say, historicize it, make an objective evaluation of what went right, what went wrong. Because again, there will be a category of decisions in foreign policy. or an economic policy, which could not have been foreseen at that time, but with the benefit of hindsight, you can pass a judgment. But I think there was a category of decisions which could have been foreseen, in fact was foreseen, that there were live debates at that particular point, saying, I don't think that's a good thing to do, I think this is a better thing to do.
You're referring to Nehru Patel?
Well, and Nehru, Patel, even issues with the post-partition Nehru Liaquat Pact. So there would be, even frankly our US policy, that there were words of caution. Yesterday in Parliament, in the context of our Constitution, there were many references to Dr. Ambedkar's resignation letter. Now, mostly these are domestic, political and social issues. But those of you who are interested in international relations, please look at that letter. Because there's a foreign policy issue there. That he actually feels essentially that we have unnecessarily antagonized the United States. So there were people who all through the 50s, it was not their contention that we didn't have problems with the US. What they were saying is, look, why am I picking a fight with the US on behalf of China? That's not my vital national interest. Now, it was not said after 62. There's not hindsight saying after the war you said, why am I doing it? These are people who said it in 50, 51, 53, 54.
One of the things you said about track 2, one level we used to complain in the old days, not enough material is available, archives are not available. But today actually, the MEA archives are actually a lot more is available today in the public domain. But is there enough transparency in terms of what happens today? For example, a lot of questions have been raised about the deal that you signed with China. Is there enough detail and knowledge so that we can debate that objectively?
As a general question, I think when it comes to transparency, it's important for policymakers, for the government to communicate, which is why we are sitting here and having this conversation. So if you look, not just at us, though I think we have done very well in that department, across the world, the diplomatic world, the government world, every government today tries to put out its version, its narrative. So to that extent, yes, but there is then the compulsion of diplomacy. You can't conduct diplomacy by putting everything out there in the open, because then, what could happen will never happen because it became difficult even before it started. So I would argue that at one level there is not just a responsibility obligation, I would actually argue there's a benefit of communication. At the same time, there's the reality of diplomacy, and diplomacy by nature is a confidential exercise. So, I'll talk to you, I'll answer the China bit, but I would refer to another example in which, I have direct experience, which was the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal had to be done that way, because had it been not done that time and in that manner, it would have never happened. I think the forces opposed to it would have actually made sure that it would have never taken off. So I think it's important to get this balance. Look, where China is concerned, it's an account where there has been much more reticence. Not now. Today people are talking about transparency. In 2005, and may come as a surprise to some of the younger people in the room, in 2005 we actually agreed with China that we were strategic partners. Now, was there a debate in this country that we should be strategic partners with another country which occupies 38,000 square kilometers of your territory and has claim to 70,000, 90,000 more? There wasn't. In fact, I remember when the strategic partnership was decided, I had army people come to me and ask me saying, they were scratching their head saying, explain this to us. Similarly, in 2006, it was agreed that we would start negotiating or look at a preferential trade agreement. Was there consultation with industry on it? No, I don't think so. Today the transparency issue is coming up with regarding to borders. Okay, in 1995, we resolved the Sundarang-Chu issue. That disengagement agreement of 1995 still has the highest level classification in Government of India. So when people talk about transparency, let us remember what the history is. In the last 4.5 years, I have seen more debates about China than I've seen in 40 years before that. Many of you today are conversant with the word PP, patrolling point. Which one of you had heard of it before 2020? Even the words, even the lexicon was not there. So today to come and say we must have transparency on this and that. Look, there are issues, yes, we have an obligation to inform, we do. But I think the expectation that it would be done, with in very great detail to the detriment of what is the operational comfort and the diplomatic strategy of a country, I think it's not a reasonable expectation. So, like anything, transparency has a place. It's a kind of a I would say something you need to take with a sense of balance, but also understanding often behind transparency is something not transparent.
I think there's a well-known saying, if there are no negotiations in secret, there are no covenants to sign in public.
Yeah,
so to some extent, you need
agree.
your business demands secrecy. But I think it's partly, I think our job as think tanks and media to question, to dig up the previous arguments, the records, what is available internationally. So I think we need to do a lot more as well to be able to bring in transparency and a historical rather than an immediate perspective. One issue, Minister, you talked about the relationship between economics and foreign policy. For a long time, and I think if you see the debates on Indian foreign policy, it looks like economics has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. We have notions like non-alignment, strategic autonomy, independent foreign, which actually economics seems to be something really not central to it. But what you're saying is really, both in the history as well as today, economics actually as the foundation, most countries know, economics is the foundation for hard power. And without that, everything else is really... So the point you're making today or yesterday again, that the relationship between economic strategy, economic salience of your partners, how that shapes our relations.
Yes, I think you are right. They have been more disconnected than was good for our country. And I think they often, therefore, led us in wrong directions. If you take, for example, the broad foreign policy establishment, I hear not just the government, but the bigger thinking in the country. For a variety of reasons, because again it's connected, its past habits, its historical experiences, there was a sharp anti-Western tinge to it. Okay, maybe stronger than a tinge. Now, look at the reality on the ground. Who are your major trade partners? Who are your major technology partners? Where do many people go for education? Where do a whole lot of people go for tourism? So, where does much of your investment come from? So, all that points in one direction. And sometimes the foreign policy points in a different direction. So, sometimes, as I say, but it's not a bad idea to do a reality check on the Indian street. The Indian street also has a common sense view of what is good for the country. And I think often, because the habits are strong, because, again, it's not illogical. They're shaped by some previous experience. So we also have to, somewhere get it into our heads that the past will not always be a guide for the future. That there will have to be experimentation and exploration to try and, because the world is changing. So I would say a tighter economic foreign policy, economic, diplomatic, and I would say even security. Because at times, if you look at if you ask the security establishment the view, that was not necessarily the view of the foreign policy establishment. So today I would argue that one of the changes is that the economic side, the security side, the orthodox foreign policy diplomatic side, they are much more tightly integrated, and their decision making is much more cohesive than it has been in the past.
So while trade and technology really expanded our engagement with the West, when it came to energy, for example, the relationship with Russia, where we stood firm in the last 3 years of the Ukraine war, as also you often talked about the importance of Russia and the Eurasian balance of power. Maybe you could just expand how that part plays into the larger strategy.
Well, where Russia is concerned, I mean, it's a very, in a way, a very unique aspect of our foreign policy. Again, understandably, because of the history, a lot of people are habituated to think in terms of the Soviet era relationship. Okay. Now, Russia has moved beyond Soviet Union. Sometimes analysis in India has not always kept pace. But the fact is, put that aside. I mean, Russia is a major power. And certainly in Eurasia, I mean, it is a major power globally. But in Eurasia, it is something even more than a major power. So, in my view, even whatever your ideological preferences, I mean, to me, it's like an international relations 101. In IR 101, your neighbor's neighbor has an enormous value. Now, in our case, it's something much more than that, because the historical experiences have been largely positive. Okay? And today we are finding new convergences and new intersections. Look, a country like India at this stage of its growth, I would just think, if you are today $4 trillion minus whatever it is, I mean, you'll soon be. And we are saying, okay, we have 7 to 8% growth for decades ahead of us. Who would be our crucial partners in the world? I think to a large extent, the major resource powers of the world. So I would actually argue here that India's economic trajectory will put a certain premium on a country like Russia or in Indonesia or in Australia or a Brazil or even a Canada. So again, this is part of the changing metrics. As we grow bigger, our partners will not be just because somebody was nice to you before. That's not the logic. There's also a new compulsion and a new, in a sense, a new rationalization of who our partners are going to be.
So maybe just a couple more before we go to the audience. You talked so much. I think this government has done so much on migration and mobility. There's a big shift from the past where we kind of derided migration, particularly professional migration. But now you actually seeing it as a virtue. But it is really the market that welcomed Indian professionals, Western markets, where they needed human beings. Now they need STEM people. But we're also at a moment in the West where there's a toxic anti-immigrant feeling. So how do you balance these two elements? Do we just leave it, market will take care of it, or do we actively need to promote migration and mobility agreements?
No, I don't think you can leave it just to the markets. I think many governments also look for reassurance and look for solutions. So it has to be intergovernment to a certain extent. It will still be significantly market driven. But bear in mind that in many countries, and I heard this very strongly in Europe, a sense of which migrants or which talent is more well regarded and which is less so. So it's not like everybody is necessarily tarred in every country with the same brush. I would put it to you that it's in our interest today to engage the world on mobility so that other countries, partner countries, have a sense of what Indian talent and Indian mobility means. It is not the same as, say, economic refugees coming from some conflict zone. So we have to, it's up to us to do that brand differentiation. It is for us to actually, in a sense, market may deal with it, but we can certainly, as a country, as a government, we can expand and improve that market. So I think it has, everybody's got to take the fair share of this load.
Okay. One last question on China. I mean, on the economic side, we have a huge relationship with China, but we also have a massive trade deficit, which is almost $100 billion a year. Now, how do we transcend this to one where there's peaceful coexistence because we are neighbors, neither of us are going to disappear from this region, and at the same time create conditions under which we actually can live peacefully and also benefit economic cooperation between the two. The current paradigm has not really worked. So what is it you're looking ahead as you think of dealing with China beyond the immediate disengagement, etc.?
Look, eventually, obviously, it's in the interest of both countries to reach an equilibrium. And conceptually, it's difficult to do because both are changing in absolute terms and vis-a-vis the world. So it's a very complex equation. The world is changing, they are changing, their relationship with the world is changing, and their relationship with each other is also changing. So in all these changes, how do you find an equilibrium? Is not going to be easy. So that would be the preferred alternative. But the problem is right now we're still grappling with the short term. And right now the short term will focus on de-escalation because, while the disengagement has been worked out, there are other issues which confront us.
Since we talked about America, Russia, and China, I think we can't leave Europe out. So there, you in your on your early formulation where you said, look, engage America, reassure Russia, manage China, and cultivate Europe. How is the cultivation of Europe going? It's really, certainly there's been a lot more attention to Europe in the last decade. Is that leading to a culmination where we can actually translate it into concrete outcomes?
Yes, I think the cultivation of Europe from the Indian perspective is certainly growing. I can see some people from Europe in the room, and I can imagine that they would not dispute that actually probably the kind of attention and the intensity of exchanges we've had in the last few years would be almost without precedent. But that doesn't automatically translate into outcomes. Today, many of our key concerns, when we speak about supply chains, when we speak about digital relationships, when we talk about AI, conversations about semiconductors, in all of this, Europe is a very, very important partner. The second, I think there's also a realization that while we each would approach the world, obviously from our vantage point and our interests, there is a broad intersection there which needs to be built upon. I've seen a lot of European interest in IMEC. I've seen a lot of European interest in mobility. I would say even on something as tricky as the conflict in Ukraine, I think whatever our earlier conversations with Europe today, my sense right now from my European colleagues is that they are quite encouraging of India trying to be helpful in some way in regard to this conflict.
Thank you, Minister. I think we got about, maybe you have 10 minutes. We can just take a couple of questions. So we'll preference to younger people. I think most of us otherwise get a chance. Yeah, introduce yourself, Monish, and then these are all ex-JNU, so partly there's a partiality.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, respected Minister. Coming right to the question. Since you spoke about rising amidst uncertainties, my question is related to rising amid uncertainties in the neighborhood. And given the kind of choice of partnerships that we have built regarding what we do in the neighborhood, my question is, what is the level of partnership with the US, which is sort of reshaping its post-Afghanistan South Asia policy, and the extent to which we have a no-holds-barred dialogue with the Americans, not just on the bilateral engagement, but also on what we can do together with each other in how India protects and promotes interest in neighborhood. Thank you.
I think Professor Chaturvedi, we're going to take one more after this, and then we have to really have a hard stop.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Sanjay Chaturvedi from South Asian University. As the leading voice of new confident India, you have always been looking ahead and asking us to look ahead of the contemporary. As India takes over now as the chair of Indian Ocean Rim Association, what do you think would be one of the top priorities on our agenda? And also given the fact that we live in a very multi-spatial world, going beyond the spaces of national jurisdictions, in India's Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, what should be India's approach to the governance of global commons, right from the deep seabed to the atmosphere to outer space and Antarctica? Thank you so much.
We'll take one more and then we'll close. Yeah. Rahul? Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, my question is, you said India wants to accelerate multipolarity in international order, but international ordering principle is pegged to bipolarity today, because if we see the indexes, they are basically moving towards bipolarity. So how do you basically conceptualize multipolarity, and what parameters do you think is world and India leading so as to translate the system into multipolarity? Thank you.
Swasti, you wanted to ask, and since I didn't ask any woman, I mean, it's absolutely, so keep it really brief. Very brief.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I just see a lot of discussion here on grand strategy, but I do sometimes wonder, why do we still continue with this disdain of having a well-formulated national security strategy? Because in my opinion, it often leads to counterproductive strategic discourse. So what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all we can take. We really have to vacate this place.
Okay. So starting with the question about the US. Look, US is a global power. Okay, so US has interests of various kinds. We are a country whose obviously there is always been a strong regional dimension, but we are going now beyond, you could say, extra regional. In our own region, there will be issues and relationships on which there will be intersections or convergences with the United States, and there will be some where there would not be. So I think as part of our relationship with the US, we should, and we do, I must tell you, we have very honest conversations on where we agree and where we don't. And because that relationship between India and US is such an important and large relationship, we factor these conversations, but we do keep advancing that relationship. So just because India-US relations are, strong and growing and improving, it doesn't mean that there is a congruence and that on every issue in our region we have identical or supportive positions. I think the events and record is quite clear on this score. On the question of global commons, IORA, look, it's a very big issue. Because we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is a philosophical outlook. Okay, it would encourage us to evolve international relations concepts in tune with that outlook. But overall, I would say when it comes to global commons, we do believe in the importance of international law. We do contribute more and more to the well-being and efficiency of the global commons. So if you look at many regimes, in the last 10 years, it's again a very interesting thing. In the last 10 years, I requested one of my colleagues to tell me how many regimes and arrangements have we joined. I think the last time we checked, it was in excess of 40. So, look, the world is changing today. We cannot take very orthodox national positions and assume somehow the rest of the world is going to run well. Because part of it is also there's the reality. The United States is going to contribute less to the global commons. Whether it wants to or whether it's a conscious choice, that's irrelevant. So we are looking at a very different world, and I think in a way, I would even put it to you that the Quad is an outcome also of concern for what is happening in the global commons. The third question, your statement, if I understood you right, you felt that the world is returning to bipolarity. Did I understand that right? Yeah, I must differ with you there. I think, yes, there is the United States, which is still the only truly global power. I grant you, in many respects, China, certainly economically, in many areas of technology, would be high in the ranking. But, there are many areas where, let us say, it'll be, Russia has a very crucial position. But there would be other countries, other players as well. Today, just look at what is happening in the Middle East. That is a classic example today. See which are the countries involved in the problem solving in the Middle East. Whether it is Syria, whether it is Gaza, or anything else. In the old bipolar days, it was US, and so look at 73, for example. It was a US-Soviet sort of shuttling which was dealing with that. So I don't believe that there is a possibility of returning to that era. China may become bigger. The United States may remain very strong. But I think today there are a whole host of other countries, and these countries, particularly in their own region, that's why I said it's an issue of multipolarity, middle power plus, and regional powers. These form a very, very potent combination, and I would suggest to you the dispersion of power is much more diffused than your question would suggest. The last question, again, I didn't fully get that, but
National security strategy.
do we need
We have debated many times in the NSAB.
Yes. No, if you ask me, should we have a national security strategy? The answer is yes. In a way, I would even say that there is one. But again, look, every country has its own way of communication, its own way of policy formulation. Because somebody else puts out a document every 3 years or 4 years and says, that is my national security. It is not necessary I follow that model. I could have it, I could tell you that it exists, but I have to kill you if I tell you. So the point is, look, different countries deal with this differently. But there is definitely a very, I would say, if you just look at the fact that we had an NSA institution, come up just about 30 years ago. Okay? Today, if you see how much that institution itself has evolved, that's one indication. But if you look at other ways of decision making and the inputs that go into it, the kind of I give you a very interesting example. Take semiconductors. Today, semiconductors is justified in the name of national security, other than economic competitiveness. So there is, I think, a growth in the sense of what is national security in the country, and I think we would deal with it our own way.
Yeah, I think we've almost come to the end, and I'll request Happymon to give a vote of thanks. And after that, when he finishes, please give space for the minister and his team to leave the room first before he gets mobbed. So please, and the security is around, I'm sure.
Thank you, Dr. Raja Mohan and Dr. Jaishankar, for that truly gripping conversation. I'd like to convey our immense gratitude to the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, for gracing this occasion. I actually have four very quick takeaways from his fantastic speech today. I think number one, I thought this is very important for people like myself, break out of the habits of foreign policy comforts so that track 2 and the strategic community can actually keep pace with track 1 and can actually think out of the box. I think that was very important. Number 2, I thought, Minister, you made a very interesting point about creating a foreign policy befitting a Viksit Bharat, and you sort of defined Viksit Bharat as a emergent, developed India, as it were. And I think it is important, as you mentioned in your speech, to take up more responsibilities, both regionally and internationally, for India to be a Viksit Bharat. The third point was think big, think long, and think smart. I think that was important, especially in the context of the first issue of the magazine, which is India's grand strategy. And I think if we don't think big, long and smart, someone else will think for us. I think that was truly important lesson. And finally, I thought the argument about we must do a reality check on the Indian street. I thought that was a fascinating argument. Sometimes we in the strategic community have the habit of thinking that all wisdom resides in New Delhi and in the strategic community. Sometimes it is important to go out of Delhi and have that reality check on the Indian street. I think on behalf of India's world and everyone present here, Dr. Jaishankar, please accept our gratitude. Let's put our hands together for the External Affairs Minister. I also wish to place on record my gratitude and appreciation for Dr. Raja Mohan, who is a pillar of strength and wisdom behind India's world. Dr. Mohan is not only India's foremost strategic thinker, he is a mentor and guide to so many generations of young Indians, including myself, although I'm not longer young, thinking about foreign policy, strategy, and international relations. A round of applause for Dr. Raja Mohan, too, please. Finally, I must note my appreciation and regard for my brilliant colleagues at India's World for converting random discussions about a potential foreign policy magazine into an actual magazine that you can actually hold in your hands. Ursh Danish, Suganya Sharma, Manu Sharma, Haley Desai, Jay Ankit Tiwari, Gaurav Saini, and all my young friends at the India's World, a big thank you to all of you. This wouldn't have been possible without you. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have once more request to put your hands together for my team at India's World. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful evening.